Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. Thank you for tuning in. This week's video is probably gonna be a little controversial, and that's because I'm gonna discuss what, in my opinion, was the worst car I've ever owned and daily driven. Now, this car has a very loyal following of fans, so I'm sure I'm gonna get absolutely murdered in the comments section. But despite that, I'm gonna discuss what it was like to own and daily drive the Honda S2000. So get your pitchforks and torches ready, because here we go. Now, before I get started, I should probably talk about a few things that might help explain some of the opinions I have about this car. First thing you're gonna notice is next to me, this is not an S2000, it's a Nissan GTR. This is my daily driver. I owned my Honda S2000 back around 2004, I believe, is when I picked it up. And of course, back then it was still a fairly new platform because it only came out in late 99 to early 2000. Therefore, some of the issues I had with the car, people may have found workarounds for by now, or there may be people making parts that fix these issues, in which case some of my arguments might not be valid anymore. The other thing too is I had an AP1. Along the line of the production of the S2000, they did switch to an AP2, at which point in time they may have fixed some of these things I had issue with, but I don't know about that. I didn't own an AP2, so everything I'm gonna talk about is going to deal directly with only the AP1 for the S2000. I think I also need to discuss where I kind of was when I had this car. Now, I picked up the Honda S2000 after I had my 97 Eclipse GSX. Now, I do talk about my 97 Eclipse GSX in another video, and if you'd like to see that video, go ahead and click in the description down below, or I'm going to put a banner above my head. You can check that out if you'd like. But basically, to give you the Reader's Digest version of the video, the car is a very unreliable car. It was horribly engineered. And while I owned the car, everything was constantly breaking on that car. And my philosophy was, well, if I've got to do the work to replace the part, I might as well upgrade it. Now, that being said, my Eclipse was running 10.8 seconds at Portland International Raceway by the time I sold it. However, like I said, I was constantly having to work on it and put money into it just to keep it on the road. And so I wanted a car that was going to be much more reliable. I had become aware of the Honda S2000 when it was first advertised in the newspaper, back when there was newspapers, and I remember seeing it and thinking it was just a really good looking car. The first time I saw it, I was still in my Miata, which was also a two-seater roadster, so the Honda S2000, which is also a two-seater convertible, really appealed to me. And of course, you know, Fast and Furious comes out and Johnny Tran drives one in Race Wars, and that just kind of cemented the fact that I kind of wanted to try one, especially with the fact that it was coming from a company that was famous for front-wheel drive cars, and they are finally releasing a rear-wheel drive platform. So that's why I was really interested in the Honda S2000, and that's why I picked one up. Before we get talking about why the car, in my opinion, just absolutely failed, I do want to talk about some things that I did actually like about the car. Let's be honest, even the worst cars out there are going to have some redeeming value. And even some of the best cars out there are going to have their Achilles heel. No car is 100% perfect, nor is any one car 100% a dud. So I do want to discuss, there was some things I did enjoy about the Honda S2000. The first thing is very apparent, and that's just the way the car looks. It is a phenomenal looking car. Whoever designed the exterior of this car did a phenomenal job. Even the engine bay, when you pop the hood and take a look at the engine, it is a beautiful engine. It's a good looking engine. They are also extremely smart in how they design the engine bay. If you take a look, there's a lot of open space in this engine bay, which means if you're like me and you like to work on the car yourself, it's something you can do easily and you're not going to need any special tools. Going to the interior of the car was also extremely nice. I mean, the chairs were super comfy. They were actually really cool looking for the time. And you take a look at just the way the interior is laid out, it was very well done. They also had some technology that was kind of trending at the time. It was actually the first car I ever owned that had the push button start, which was kind of a cool thing at the time. And of course, it had the stereo that was hidden behind that little metal faceplate, which kind of cleaned up the interior if you wanted to kind of hide your stereo. Also made it so if you had an aftermarket deck, people who might try to break into your car to steal it wouldn't know what you had. Kind of dissuaded that particular type of activity. You also take a look at the dash. The dash is also kind of cool, like for the time, futuristic looking. It's just an all-around gorgeous car. The other thing I liked about the Honda S2000, I did mention before, is it did have that Honda reliability. I never had an issue mechanically with that car. It ran perfectly from the day I bought it to the day I sold it. Now granted, yes, the car was only about 4 or 5 years old when I had it, so really it shouldn't have had any issues. However, if you take a look at my Eclipse GSX, it was a 97, and I had it in about 2002, which means it was only about 5 years old, and I had nothing but mechanical issues with that car. So Honda reliability does definitely live up to it with the Honda S2000. Another thing I really enjoyed about the S2000 is it was a rear-wheel drive platform from a notorious front-wheel drive company. Now, I don't particularly care for front-wheel drive. I've driven it and I just don't like the way it feels through the steering wheel. I prefer the way a rear-wheel drive or sometimes an all-wheel drive car just kind of feels when you drive it. So I really did enjoy the feel. It was a really good car if you wanted to use it as your commuter car, getting from point A to point B. You weren't gonna have any issues, and it was kind of fun. You know, I couldn't put it through its paces in the corners like I could the Miata, but it was still a fun car. The last thing that the thing had that was absolutely great for me was it had a power soft top. Now I came from Miatas where when you wanted to put the top down, it was always manual. You had to be careful that you didn't crease the plastic rear window. The Honda S2000 has a power top, and that was just a really great luxury for me to have, and that's something I really enjoyed about the Honda S2000. Now that I've discussed what I like about the car, it's time for me to tell you why I think this was the worst car I've ever owned and daily driven. Now, I can hear all you keyboard warriors out there cracking your knuckles, getting ready to just absolutely kill me in the comment section. All that I ask is that you hear me out to the end, and then at the end, if you disagree with me, go ahead and post in the comment section down below. I will respond to you and we can have a nice discussion about this. The first thing with the S2000, why I just didn't like it, is the car was slow. Now, I know that might sound like a shocker to you because it's a sports car, but to me, the car felt like it really had no kick. Now, you may argue that my opinion really isn't fair because I was coming off of the 97 Eclipse GSX where I was running a 10.8 second quarter mile. And after the S2000, I had my first Mark IV Turbo 6-speed Supra. So my opinion might be slightly skewed. But that being said, in my opinion, the S2000 was just slow. It was actually my first and only experience with the VTEC engine, and maybe I was expecting a little bit more out of the VTEC. To me, the VTEC didn't actually make the car any faster when it hit, it just made it louder, which, you know, I want my speed, but like I said, maybe I was just used to a turbo spooling up and putting me in my seat, and I was expecting more from VTEC than really what it was. The other issue that the S2000 had was you really couldn't do much with that engine to make it faster. Now, yes, I did have a Comtech cold air intake, and there was a Comtech supercharger on the market at the time, but we were really limited in the amount of PSI we could put through that engine. For some reason, Honda released that engine with what was considered a fiber reinforced wall. People at the time, if they wanted to put more than about 5 or 6 PSI through the engine, had to pull the entire engine out of the car, take it apart, bore it out, and then sleeve it to deal with that fiber reinforced wall so they can put down more PSI and put down more power. And that was just really more work than I felt was necessary. Obviously, Honda knew people like me were gonna be buying this car, and naturally we're gonna wanna modify it. So I don't know why they put out an engine that had such limitations on it. The next reason why I felt that the S2000 is the worst car I've owned and daily driven is, in my opinion, the cardinal sin. This is where the S2000 officially lost me, and that is the S2000 is not a great handling car. Now, I know what you're thinking. This can't be true. You've read online about how it's a great handling car. You've seen videos of it going through canyons or drifting, and you think it's just this great handling car. And from personal experience, it's really not. Now, there again, my opinion might be slightly skewed because before I had the S2000, I had owned 2 Miatas, and in my opinion, those are some of the best handling cars on the road, hands down. And that might be part of my issue with the S2000. I do have a story to kind of back this up. Back when I had my S2000, I met up with an S2000 owners group up in Portland, Oregon. And there was about 15 of us. And we were gonna make a drive from Portland, Oregon out to Pacific City. And the road between the two is a nice twisty road with absolutely no one on it. Now, during this drive, somebody brought their friends with them and they had 2 Miatas. And we all figured, hey, you know, we're all 2-seater roadster convertibles, so we're gonna let them roll with us. They're just gonna roll at the back of the pack so they don't get in our way. funny thing about that is about a quarter of the way through the drive, I think the Miata guys got bored and decided to start passing us. And they were passing us quite regularly. Now, myself and a few of the other S2000 owners that had track experience decided we couldn't let that stand and decided to put our foot down. We had to try and keep up with these Miatas, especially when you take a look at the cost of the S2000 at the time versus the cost of the Miata. There's no way we can let this go unanswered. And try as we might, we could not catch those Miatas for anything. And if you think about it, it really does kind of make sense. The Miata is a much more smaller car and it's a much more lighter car. And that means that they could brake later going into the corners and they could straighten out the corners more, which means they can carry more speed through the corners. So obviously the Miata is going to handle a corner better than the S2000. I thought at the time, like, well, okay, even if I can't go through the corners with the speed that they can, I should at least be able to catch them on the straightaways, right? No. As I discussed earlier, the S2000 is deceptively slow. We just couldn't catch those Miatas for anything. They reached Pacific City way before us. In fact, they were sipping a Coke by the time the rest of the S2000 club decided to pull into the parking lot. It was very embarrassing. Not only does the S2000 not handle well, it is also dangerous in how well it does not handle. One of the things that people like to brag about with the S2000 is the center of mass of the car is literally in the dead center of the car. And they think this is a great fact. It's supposed to be great for handling. In my personal experience, I found out this is not true. Now, if you think about it, when you were young, you maybe spun around in circles to try and make yourself dizzy. You may have realized that as you were spinning around, if you put your arms out wide, you spun slower. If you pulled your arms in tight, you would actually spin much faster. Now think about that with the S2000. They put the center of the mass in the dead center of the car. And that means that if you do start to spin out, you're gonna keep spinning. I did have a situation with my S2000 where, once again, I was at the quarter mile at Portland International Raceway, and I hard shifted from second to third, and that car just decided to spin on me, and there was nothing I could do. Now, you might want to try and blame that on me as a driver, and you may partially be right. I'm not a perfect driver, nobody is. But there's another issue with the S2000 handling that, like I said, this goes with the AP1. I heard they may have fixed this with the AP2, and I hope they really did. And that was the power steering system on the car was an electronic power steering system. It was not mechanical. And it was notorious for being slower than the driver. So what this means is if you start to get into trouble, you can't counter steer fast enough to get yourself out of it. Also programmed into the ECU was an electronic steering assist. And what that would do is if it felt the car starting to slip, it would limit the range of motion from your front tires, which would normally be this, to something like this. So you didn't overreact. And what this would do is it would make it so you had no counter steer, which means if that rear end started to step out on me, I would have at least been able to counter steer, but you can't do it with the S2000. Here again, like I said, this was also during the time about 2004 to 2006, so technology may have changed and people may have found ways around this. But when I had my S2000, the only way to make this car a more reliable handling car and less dangerous was to remove your entire steering column and your entire steering system and replace it with one out of an RX-7. And that's what people up there, I believe Horsepower Freaks, were doing at the time. That was the only way to make the car a good driving car. So like I said, the car was not fast and the car was not that great handling of a car, which is why I feel that that is the worst car that I have owned that was a daily driver. And there it is. That is why I think the Honda S2000 is the worst car I've owned and daily driven. Like I said, it was slow and it just doesn't handle, at which point in time, what is the point? It does make a good commuter car if you just want to get from point A to point B, throw the top down, enjoy the weather, and have a little bit of speed getting on the freeway. But other than that, it's not that impressive of a car. That being said though, I hope you did enjoy my video. If you did, go ahead and click that thumbs up button to let me know. It does help the channel out a lot. If you want to see more content, specifically GTR in the future, go and subscribe to my channel. You can now follow me on all forms of social media, which include Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. I'll leave links to those in the description down below. If you'd like to support the channel, I have now opened up the JD Archer shop. If you go to jdarcher.bigcartel.com, you can see a limited selection of t-shirts, hats, and hoodies I have available for sale, and there are more designs coming. I have also become an Amazon affiliate. If you go back to some of my previous videos where I show you how to work on cars, if you go to the descriptions, I now have listed every part I used and every tool. So if that's a job you need to do, you can now figure out if there's anything you're missing before you get started. Click on a link and it'll take you right to the part so you can stock up before you get started. Now, for those of you that were patient enough not to flame me during the middle of the video, if you'd like to post in the comment section down below, if you have any questions or comments, I will respond to you. Let's just try and keep it a little civil. Like I said, I know there are some huge fans of the S2000 out there, and what I'm saying might not necessarily be popular, but let's discuss. You may already have an S2000, you may have a different experience, which is from mine, which is great. Let's talk about it. Or maybe even have an AP2, and you can tell me they fixed all of these issues that I had with the car and it's a great car. Either way, I thank you all for watching, and until next time, forget everything else, focus on the finish line.